Human history did not begin with prisons. For most ancient societies, keeping thousands of convicted criminals alive behind walls was expensive, inefficient, and often impossible. Punishment had to be immediate. It had to be visible. And above all, it had to leave an impression on everyone who survived to watch it. A sentence was rarely designed for the condemned person alone. It was a message delivered through the human body. Kings used mutilation to display authority. Empires used execution to terrify rebellious cities. Religious courts used public suffering to defend doctrine. Governments turned town squares into theaters where law, violence, and entertainment occupied the same wooden platform. Some punishments killed in seconds, others were deliberately constructed not to. These were the punishments designed to erase the body, destroy the name, and warn the living Babylon. Retribution. Written in stone around 1754 BCE, King Hammurabi of Babylon ordered hundreds of laws carved into a monumental stone stele. The code did not invent punishment. It organized it. Its central principle was retaliation. If a man destroyed the eye of his social equal, his own eye could be destroyed. If he broke another man's bone, his own bone could be broken. If a badly constructed house collapsed and killed its owner, the builder could be executed. The punishment followed the injury. But equality before the law did not exist. The consequence often depended on the social status of both the victim and the offender. Injuring an enslaved person might require financial compensation. Injuring a free man could cost the offender part of his own body. The code also extended punishment beyond the guilty individual. If a collapsing house killed the owner's son, the builder's son could be put to death. The child had not designed the house. The law required balance, not innocence. For theft, false accusation, military desertion, kidnapping, and certain forms of fraud, death could follow. Some offenders were drowned. Others were burned. A tavern keeper who concealed criminals could be executed, even if she had taken no part in their crimes. The stone monument presented these rules as an ordered system protected by divine authority. Pain had become administration, the Assyrian Empire. Terror as government policy between the 9th and 7th centuries BCE, the Neo-Assyrian Empire expanded across Mesopotamia and the eastern Mediterranean. Its armies used iron weapons, siege engines, organized logistics, and professional soldiers. But its most effective weapon may have been reputation. Assyrian kings recorded punishment in royal inscriptions. Rebels were impaled, captured leaders were flayed, severed heads were stacked near city gates. Entire populations were deported and resettled hundreds of miles from home. The violence was not hidden. It was carved into palace walls. Reliefs showed soldiers attacking fortified cities, while prisoners waited below. Some captives were led away in chains. Others were displayed on stakes outside the walls. The image told neighboring rulers what resistance would purchase. King Ashurnasirpal II described covering a pillar with the skins of rebel leaders. Later Assyrian inscriptions recorded men being walled inside structures or impaled on stakes after failed revolts. Flaying required the executioner to separate the skin from the body while keeping enough of it intact for display. Whether death came early or late depended on blood loss, shock, infection, and the skill of the men holding the knives. The skin could then be attached to a wall or pillar. The victim disappeared, the warning remained. This policy produced obedience, but rarely loyalty. Subject kingdoms repeatedly rebelled whenever Assyrian power weakened. Fear maintained the empire. It also ensured that few mourned when the empire collapsed. Ancient Persia and the punishment of the boats. Greek writers described a Persian execution later known as scaphism, or the punishment of the boats. The condemned person was allegedly trapped between two narrow vessels, with the head, arms, and legs extending outside. The body was covered with milk and honey. More was forced into the victim's mouth. The boats were then left in stagnant water or exposed beneath the sun. Insects gathered around the food, the waste, and the trapped body. The victim could remain alive through repeated feedings while dehydration, exposure, infection, and tissue damage accumulated. The best-known story concerns Mithridates, a Persian soldier said to have been punished during the reign of Artaxerxes II in the 4th century BCE. The account claims that he survived for 17 days. But there is a problem. Most detailed descriptions come from Greek authors writing about a powerful Persian rival. The story may preserve a real punishment, an exaggerated version of one, or political propaganda shaped to portray Persia as exotic and cruel. The mechanism is plausible. The details are not independently confirmed. That uncertainty matters because many famous torture devices entered popular history through repetition rather than evidence. Once an execution story became vivid enough, later writers copied it until possibility hardened into fact. Scaphism may have happened. Its legend certainly did the Roman world. Death on the cross. Rome did not invent crucifixion. Forms of suspension, impalement, and execution on wooden structures had already appeared in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Rome turned the method into an imperial institution. Crucifixion was normally reserved for enslaved people, rebels, pirates, and those accused of threatening Roman authority. Roman citizens were generally protected from it. Although exceptions appeared during periods of political crisis, the punishment began before the cross. The condemned could be stripped and scourged with a whip fitted with cords, knots, or hard fragments. The victim was then forced to carry a wooden crossbeam toward the execution site. The upright post might already be waiting. Hands or wrists were tied or nailed to the beam. The body was raised. The feet could be fixed to the post in several positions. There was no single standardized Roman cross. The purpose was not rapid death. Suspension made breathing progressively harder. Blood loss, trauma, dehydration, heat, cold, exhaustion, and circulatory failure worked together. Some victims died within hours. Others survived far longer. Executioners could accelerate death by breaking the legs, preventing the condemned from pushing upward to breathe. A spear wound or heavy blow could provide final confirmation. Bodies were often left exposed. Birds and animals completed the sentence. In 71 BCE, after the defeat of the slave rebellion led by Spartacus, approximately 6,000 captured rebels were reportedly crucified along the Appian Way between Capua and Rome. The road was nearly 200 kilometers long. Travelers passed one body after another. Rome had constructed a border from the dead. Rome's sack punishment. Not every Roman execution used a cross. For the crime of killing a parent or close family member, Roman law developed the punishment known as poena collae, the penalty of the sack. The condemned person was placed inside a leather sack. Later descriptions sometimes include animals placed inside with the prisoner, commonly a dog, rooster, snake, or monkey. The sack was sewn shut. It was then thrown into a river or the sea. The symbolism mattered as much as the drowning. A person who had destroyed the family was denied ordinary contact with earth, air, and burial. The sack separated the condemned from the natural world. The animals may not have appeared in every period or every execution. Roman legal traditions changed over centuries, and later writers often combined different versions into a single fixed ritual. But the central method was real. The condemned was enclosed, transported, and submerged. There was no grave. Even the corpse was punished. Imperial China. Death by slicing. For centuries, Imperial Chinese law recognized several forms of execution, including strangulation, beheading, and a punishment later known in the West as death by 1,000 cuts. Its Chinese name was lingchi. The phrase did not require exactly 1,000 cuts. The number varied, and surviving accounts do not describe one universal procedure. The condemned was restrained in public, while an executioner removed portions of flesh before delivering a fatal wound or decapitation. In some cases, death may have been given early. In others, it was prolonged. Lingchi was reserved for offenses considered especially destructive to the moral and political order, including treason, rebellion, and certain murders committed against senior family members or masters. The body carried deep cultural significance. Confucian traditions emphasized receiving the body from one's parents and preserving it. Dismemberment, therefore, attacked more than physical life. It destroyed bodily integrity. The sentence could also include the execution of relatives, confiscation of property, or punishment after death. A corpse might be dismembered when the accused had already died before judgment. Lingchi continued into the late Qing dynasty. In 1905, the imperial government formally abolished it as part of a broader program of legal reform. Photography had already preserved some of its final victims. An ancient punishment entered the modern world through a camera lens. Medieval Europe. Breaking on the wheel. The breaking wheel appeared across parts of medieval and early modern Europe, particularly in territories that later became Germany and France. The condemned was tied to a large wheel or stretched over a wooden frame. The executioner then struck the arms and legs with an iron bar, hammer, or heavy club. The order of the blows could be written into the sentence. A merciful judgment might instruct the executioner to strike the chest or neck early, ending life quickly. A harsher order began at the limbs and moved inward, Bones fractured, limbs were threaded through the spokes. The wheel could then be raised horizontally or mounted upright on a pole, leaving the victim exposed above the crowd. Death followed from trauma, internal bleeding, shock, exposure, or strangulation. The method transformed the body into part of the display. In France, executioners sometimes strangled the prisoner after the second or third blow. In other cases, the condemned remained alive on the wheel after the public ceremony had ended. France abolished the punishment during the Revolution. Germany used it into the 19th century, with a recorded case as late as 1827. The wheel had once symbolized movement. The executioner made it a platform where nothing could move normally again. England. Hanged, drawn, and quartered in medieval and early modern England, ordinary murder could lead to hanging. High treason required something larger. A man convicted of betraying the monarch could be sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. The punishment developed over time, but its full form became one of the most elaborate executions authorized by English law. First, the prisoner was drawn to the execution site on a hurdle pulled by a horse. This prevented death before the official ceremony and protected the streets from the body. Next came hanging. But the prisoner was sometimes cut down before death. The executioner then removed the internal organs. They could be burned in front of the condemned. The prisoner was finally beheaded, and the remaining body was divided into 4 sections. The head and quarters became government property. They were displayed on bridges, gates, castle walls, and other public structures. Each location extended the execution far beyond the scaffold. Dafydd ap Gruffydd, a Welsh prince captured after rebelling against Edward I, received the full sentence in 1283. William Wallace suffered a similar execution in London in 1305. The sentence remained legally available for centuries. In 1814, Parliament modified the procedure so that the condemned would be hanged until dead before the later mutilation. Drawing and quartering was finally abolished in Britain in 1870. The empire that built railways still possessed a law for cutting traitors into 4 pieces. Burning at the stake fire served governments because it destroyed slowly, publicly, and symbolically. In Europe, burning was used against convicted heretics, alleged witches, religious dissidents, counterfeiters, and women convicted of certain forms of treason. The condemned was tied to a post surrounded by wood and combustible material. Executioners sometimes placed fuel close to the body for a quicker death. In harsher arrangements, the fire began farther away. Smoke inhalation could kill before the flames reached the torso. When the wind shifted or the wood was damp, the process lasted longer. Some prisoners were secretly or officially strangled before ignition. Others were given bags of gunpowder intended to explode in the heat. These measures were described as mercy, although they were not always effective. In 1431, Joan of Arc was burned at Rouen after an English-backed church court and convicted her of heresy. Witnesses reported that the fire was cleared, so the crowd could see her body before it was burned again. The remains were reduced further. The ashes were thrown into the Seine. The purpose was to prevent relics, burial, and political memory. It failed. 25 years later, a retrial overturned the conviction. The body had vanished. The name had not. Japan. Punishment by status in feudal Japan. Execution also reflected class. Common criminals could be beheaded, crucified, burned, or displayed after death. Samurai were sometimes permitted or ordered to perform seppuku, cutting the abdomen before an assistant delivered a decapitating stroke. The ritual has often been romanticized as a purely voluntary expression of honor. It was not always voluntary. By the 15th century, seppuku had developed into a formal method of capital punishment for members of the warrior class. A samurai might receive the order from his lord or government and be expected to carry it out under supervision. The setting could be carefully arranged. Officials attended. The condemned wore formal clothing. A short blade was placed before him. In some later ceremonies, the abdominal cut became symbolic. The prisoner merely reached for the blade before the assistant struck. That reduced suffering. It also preserved the appearance of self-control. The same state that executed commoners as criminals allowed members of the warrior class to participate in their own death as a final privilege. Even brutality followed rank. The public scaffold. These punishments emerged in different civilizations, under different religions, and across thousands of years, but they repeatedly served the same functions. They removed an offender. They displayed political power. They turned private pain into public instruction. The body became a legal document that could be read from a city wall, a roadside cross, a riverbank, or a wheel raised above the town square. Modern prisons gradually replaced many public corporal punishments. Central governments gained the resources to confine people for years. Medical knowledge changed how suffering was understood. Legal systems began separating justice from spectacle. At least in principle, the scaffold moved behind walls. Execution became quieter, but the historical pattern remains visible. The most brutal punishments were rarely created because rulers lacked faster ways to kill. Blades, ropes, poison, and heavy weapons were already available. Speed was not the objective was memory. A simple death removed one person, a spectacle governed everyone who watched.